From Vassar College, this is Conversations at the Salt Line with Wesley Dixon. On this episode, a conversation with Robert Jones Jr.
Hey everyone, it's me, Wes, and welcome to another episode of Conversations at the Salt Line. Today I'm very honored to welcome New York City writer Robert Jones Jr. Thank you for being here.
Wes, thank you for having me.
It's my pleasure. It's so exciting to have you here. Just for those listening who might be Vassar affiliated, Robert is here because his debut novel, The Prophets, was chosen as the common reading for the class of 2028. First of all, saying that sentence is triggering for me because, you know, the 2028 is really it's out of control. I think I'm a young person with a young spirit, but I think I'm just a young person, a young spirit with an old age, if you will, now, right? So saying that, it was hard for me to say, but it's great to have you here.
It is my pleasure. And I must say that when I found out that Vassar selected The Prophets, I was stunned.
Really?
Mainly because of all of the things that are happening in the world around affirmative action,
Okay.
DEI, book bannings, don't say gay, all of that stuff. So courageous for Vassar to choose a book that basically attacks all of those things.
Covers
all
these lightning rods.
Yes.
Well,
so I was stunned
I'm
and
happy to
grateful.
hear you say that. I'm happy to hear you say that. I love expressions of gratitude. And it's funny. I was going to ask you about that because, of course, we're in an era of book banning, and I've heard you say previously that you wear it as a badge of honor that your book is banned in a variety of places. So I was curious to know what it meant for your book to be invited into a place. If it was an honor for you to be banned somewhere, what is it to be invited into a particular space?
It was. I feel gratitude to the nth degree. And I should also go back to, correct my statement about badge of honor.
Okay.
Considering now that I see this as a piece of an agenda that's attempting to bring the country back, as the former president once said, 300 years.
Yeah.
So while I do understand that the banning of the book is because they hate the ideas that are expressed in it, and that I'm glad that I'm offending them in that sense.
Yeah.
The banning now strikes me as something that is remarkably dangerous.
Of course.
So, little caveat to that.
Yeah. Well, Vassar's always been a trailblazing institution. I think one that has lots of courage, even in its history, right? So I'm happy to hear you reflect back to me that even in this contemporary moment, we are doing things that signal to you that we are still being courageous and leaning in and being true to our history and to our missions. I'm really happy to hear you say
Extraordinarily
that.
so.
It's apropos for us to have this conversation because just last week, literally, I was in D.C. for the Atlantic Festival, the Atlantic Magazine Festival, and there's all kinds of different panels and sessions, and one of them was about banning books, or book bans, if you will, right? And there was a range of amazing artists and authors. Everyone was based in America, but some were of Sudanese origin or Iranian origin. Others were American. But hearing them talk about their perspectives on book bannings here, particularly the ones who are of international origin, having them think about their concerns and their cautionary tales of what it means to have book bans here, having come from geographies that have progressed down the lineage of things beyond book bans, right, was very chilling for me. One of the quotes I think they said was, particularly the Iranian author, said that censorship of language leads to censorship of people. And it was just so pointed, but so helpful to hear, if you will. What do you make of our moment? Of course, you said book banning is dangerous. We all, I think, can agree on that. But what concerns did you have about the ramifications of that down the line, second and third order degree effects?
That's exactly it. This is the first move in a chess play to rob people of their freedoms, of their rights. We start with erasing the history through the book banning. Making it such that marginalized people and voices don't get heard, so that the narratives that do come from the top down are what covers the land. And then you start slowly taking away their rights. women no longer have autonomy over their own bodies, and other people who have wombs. The voting rights for people of color
Right.
begin to retract. All of these things are connected. And the ways in which we, the government or the people in charge, sort of promote these things is by stealing knowledge, stealing language,
Right.
keeping the populace ignorant. So it's haunting
Yeah.
and scary, and I'm wondering, how do we fight it? How do we push back?
Yeah. Well, I think you writing the book in this instance and having our students and others engage with the book, I think is one of the small, micro, but scalable ways, right, that
Truly.
we can fight back against sort of the inertia, if you will,
Truly.
of our moment. So let's talk about the book. I don't want to assume that everyone listening has read it. So maybe briefly, you can give a quick sort of premise setting of the book, just so someone has some common language as we talk about it that they can sort of pull from, if you will.
Yes. So The Prophets is the story of Samuel and Isaiah, two enslaved young men on a plantation in Mississippi during the 1830s. What's uncommon about the book is that this focuses on the love between them. They are in love. They are what we now call queer. And the novel explores how that love disrupts the dynamics of the plantation, how the other enslaved people view them, how the plantation owners view them. And there's also an element of the book that goes further back in time to the African continent to explore ideas of gender, gender identity, and sexuality prior to colonization.
Perfect. Wonderful. I couldn't have done it better, obviously. So thank you for doing that. And I'll annotate along the way just based on our conversation. But one of the things that you mentioned that struck me early on in the book is this theme of memory. And memory has, it's described in many different beautiful ways. At some points it's described as prickly, as sort of as a nuisance is how I understood it, which I think is true in my experience. And memory plays an active role in different parts of the book, right? We go back to sort of a pre-colonial West African moment that is ushered into the memory of the reader, right? But ultimately, in other ways, I assume the memory of Isaiah, Samuel, and others, right? Through the ancestors or other sorts of mechanisms. But I want to actually think about memory for you, Robert, for a moment. And I actually want, because the book is, I imagine, I'm projecting, so tell me if I'm projecting incorrectly. I imagine the book is a personal project for you.
It is.
Right? It felt that way. That's why I'm making this sort of comment. And so I'm curious, in your memory, in the life of Robert, what is a memory from your childhood that influences how you show up in the world and might have influenced how you went about this project?
Okay, there are several.
Okay.
But the one that, on a positive note, that seems to impact me the most is how I interacted with my great aunts, who the character Maggie is sort of a composite character based on.
Okay.
And they lived in the South.
Where in the South?
South Carolina,
Okay.
Dillon, South Carolina, in a
Okay.
little parish called Little Rock.
Okay.
And I used to go down there for the summers. They were my great-grandmother's sisters, and she had many. And they were the strongest women I have ever encountered. These were women who could fight men and win, who carried razor blades in their cheeks, who taught me how to shuck corn and snap peas and chop cane and all of those sorts of things, and who loved me with a sort of force that I have never experienced, loved me, and taught me about spirituality that was very heavily African influenced, although it was called Christian. And they are the ones for whom, when I'm writing about ancestral energies and ancestral voices, these are the people that I'm calling forth. They had the most profound impact on me as an individual and how I show up in the world, how I show up with other people, how I engage other people. Because, you know, there's this thing called Southern hospitality, but it's not put on. It's real. Like when I see you, it's good morning, and I mean it, you know? And that's not typical of a Northerner. but.
You're not offending me. You know I'm not a northerner, so you're not offending me at all. But understood. When you started answering that question, I thought what you were going to say, and maybe you mean this too, was that your great aunts in South Carolina were the influences for the ancestral chapters, sort of the voices
That
in those
too.
interspersed chapters,
Yes.
right? They very much felt like this is a very pedestrian and less serious way of putting it, but they felt to me like the Greek chorus in Hercules.
Yes.
That when I read those chapters, that's
yes.
what kept coming to my mind. Different colored, but the same people.
On the flip side,
Yeah.
the other parts of my memory that influence me are how inhospitable others were to me when they sensed a budding queerness during my childhood, how harsh and unfriendly people could be, and how that drove me inward, where the only solace, the only friend was writing. And so, in many ways, I have friends, but I'm also, in a sense, a loner, because it's hard to take down that shield after you've erected it for so long, you know?
Yeah.
So that's been a tremendous influence as well.
I hear you. I've heard someone say a long time ago, just this last point, that when walls, you said shield, but I'm going to use the word walls, but when walls fall down, they create bridges. And it's been a very helpful thing for me to keep in my mind,
Oh, right.
because I think it's true.
Okay.
And it makes us, in the ways that the book reveals, through Isaiah and Samuel in particular, when the vulnerability is sort of minimized, right? It's where the sort of the merging of people and emotions and souls can happen, right? And so it's a very similar sort of analog. It's funny, you use the word hospitable and inhospitable in this most recent comment, and it reminds me of a moment where I laughed out loud in the book, and it's when Brother Gabriel, sort of the Portuguese colonizer or whatever, comes with the help of these other tribes to the Kasango tribe, and they sort of say, you know, we need to feed them. We have to be hospitable. We can't just have these demons here and not feed them, right? And I laughed because I have a coworker here at Vassar, I won't call his name, who used to work in the Middle East, and for an American institution in the Middle East, and he is super adventurous. And so he one time he rented a Jeep or whatever and drove out into the desert in Abu Dhabi is where it was,
wow.
to find this oasis that he had heard was a beautiful oasis. He wanted to go see it, the whole thing, whatever. This is pre-kids, so he had a much more higher tolerance for craziness. So he was driving out in the oasis, and he ended up running into these Bedouin people who were on ATVs and whatever else, right? And they sort of not so politely were like, you got to come with us. Like, we found you and you have to come with us, right? And I don't think he felt any sort of ability to deny them that.
Right.
So he drove out with them, followed them to the middle of nowhere. Of course, it's dark. There's no street. You know, it's like the desert.
Yes.
So they end up coming smack dab in the middle of this huge, I was going to say encampment. That means a different thing nowadays, but this tent encampment in the middle of the desert that had, you know, like flat screens hooked up. It was a tent, but it was cosmopolitan and traditional at the same time. And so, you know, they had a great time. He was playing Xbox with them. I mean, it was a whole, like, you couldn't make these things up, right? Anyway, so
goodness.
they took him back to his car at some point. He told his buddy back here, hey, who's in the FBI, like, hey, listen, I was with these people, whatever. He was like, listen, I'm happy you're okay. Just so you know, as part of Bedouin culture, when they run into a stranger in the desert, they have to host them. It doesn't matter if it's their enemy. It doesn't matter if they are someone they don't like, but they have to host them if they run into a stranger in the desert. Even if they intend after they host them to kill them or to harm them, they have to. They cannot do that until they have been hospitable to that person.
That's astounding.
And so I immediately thought of this story and this insight that he shared with me when I read this part in the book, because I'm like, it seemed like a very similar sort of ethos, right? Where hospitality had its role and trumped any other sort of emotion that people might feel.
Well, that was, according to my great aunts, that was the great sin of Sodom and Gomorrah, was they were inhospitable, not the queerness, you know, the violence and the inhospitability was the sin, which we don't hear
That's not
very
part
much.
of the story that we hear today.
No.
So speaking of memory, you know, the book, I've heard you say, took 14 years to write.
It did.
For a variety of reasons.
Yes.
And of course, you change over a 14-year period. the world changes over a 14-year period. I imagine your memory changes, or how you interpret your memories might change over a 14-year period of time.
Yes.
And so I'm curious what that means for the novel, and how things might have changed, stayed the same, what premises might have shifted, what grounds might have shook as you were discovering yourself, as you were creating this novel.
That is the blessing of being a writer, because writing is revision. And so what I started out with looks nothing like what ended up in the world, because I was growing as an artist as I was writing, and had the ability to go back and change and rearrange and think, and had the input of very, very smart people. My friend Osvaldo, who was an adjunct at NYU, my editor and my agent, all giving me input, my partner, my husband, all giving me input on the things that they saw and liked or disliked or had questions about, which prompted questions for myself to try to understand deeper, on deeper levels, what this novel was about and who it was for, and who am I writing to? Am I writing to myself, or am I writing to an audience? So there were so many revisions. There are so many drafts of The Prophets over 14 years, so many that I can't even count. I went back maybe a month ago to look at the very first draft of it, and it's so different. Not necessarily bad.
Yeah, you didn't say bad. No.
But not as refined, and some of the characters fall a little flat. But I see the seeds. And that's what your job is as a writer, is to keep going back, trying to improve it. In fact, I was telling Michael yesterday during our talk that I don't read the book anymore, because every time I do, I'm editing it. I'm crossing out words and putting in new words, and I'm like, that's kind of not helpful now, because the book is already out in the world, and this energy should be for the second novel.
Okay, we can talk about that in a little bit too.
Okay.
But that's super helpful to hear. And in addition to memory, I was struck reading the book with what I experienced as the presence of many, many contrast, right? And I'm not sure this is intentional. I'll tell you what I read and what I took from it, right? But there's these literary contrasts between like light and dark all throughout, right? There's sort of the idea of being seen or unseen, right? There's also sort of this way in which sound and noise is contrasted in many ways that I took, right? There's like pure silence, right? There's cacophony and chaos, right? And there's something in the middle, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But there's all these contrasts, but they're funny because the contrasts also in and of themselves take on a different life than I would have assumed they would have, right? So for example, let's talk about light and dark. In this novel, dark has, in the way I interpret it, a very generative spirit to it, right? In ways that we don't actually often think about darkness having, right?
Yes.
And so it was beautiful. At the same time, we used light in traditional ways, right? We talked about the halo over Isaiah in some ways when he was sort of living in his true self, right? And so it was such a beautiful thing to sort of see these things contrasted and given literal voice, but like verbal economy in the novel. And so I'm just curious how you react to my interpretation of these things, and if and how you think about them from the artist's perspective as you were creating these worlds.
I tried very hard when writing The Prophets to not make the dark synonymous with evil, because as someone who grew up in the Nation of Islam and subsequently rejected the ideology, I did remember some of the earliest teachings about how one of the ways in which black people in America are indoctrinated to self-hatred is through the association of blackness with evil, or darkness with evil, and all bad things. Villains wear black and heroes wear white, and all of that sorts of things. So on the granular level, there's this push for us to understand ourselves as inherently sinful or bad. And I wanted to sort of flip that on its head. So Samuel and Isaiah find themselves most loving in the dark. They are covered by the night sky, which is like them in the dark. The ancestral voices come to them from the dark, you know.
Right.
So all of these sorts of things. So that was wholly intentional, and I'm glad that you picked up on that.
Oh, absolutely. Oh, 100%. No, I don't know when it was in the book. It was early when Samuel said to Isaiah they were going to kiss, and Samuel said, "Not in the light," and I was like, "Oh," it was like, that's different. Like, and so very early on, I picked up on sort of the role of light and dark as being different than we might have otherwise thought about them. The contrasts are funny though, because so as a quick aside, but relevant to what we're talking about, the Salt Line podcast sort of has a very intentional naming behind it as well too. The salt line is an ecologic phenomena that happens in tidal and estuary rivers, and the Hudson River is one of those, right? And so where the brackish water from New York Harbor meets the fresh water from the Adirondacks is the salt line, right? And it's sort of where these different things come together. And we think about it as a very generative place, because at the salt line, sort of biologically, is where young fish go to get special nutrients to grow into being healthy adult fish. It's a very good metaphor for our students here at Vassar. And so we want these conversations to sort of be at the intersection of things that seem to be contrast, right? But actually come together in very productive ways.
Yes.
And so when I was reading, I'm living my life looking for salt lines, because I think that's where you can grow and you can build from, right? And as I was reading, I was trying to identify some as well. And many come up in a whole bunch of different ways, right? But it was a very helpful thing to think about. So, for example, I talked about the contrast between sort of noise and silence, right? And obviously, one of the things that stuck out to me early on was the use of the word whisper, right? Because it is sort of, I interpreted it as a salt line, right? It's not pure quiet, right? But it's not noise,
yes.
right? But it was the vehicle through which much happened in the novel. Communication of all types, as you described it, happened through whispers, right? Anything that was I took it, anything that was meaningfully said, or anything that needed to be heard, was said through a whisper.
Yes.
Wow. And so,
Okay.
so it was so interesting for me to sort of see the contrast, not as contrast rather, but to see them as things that anchor what is the salt line in the middle. And I just was so moved by it. How do you react to my interpretation of your book?
That is a fantastic analysis that I had not previously considered. And as you were saying it and describing salt line, I thought immediately of Adam.
Yeah, it's written down on my notes. And so when I read, so I had this thought about salt lines before I got to Adam's chapter in the book, right? And so when I got to Adam's chapter and it's literally described with like the line that goes down the middle of him, I was like, I got it. Like it's going throughout. Like here it is.
What a good reading.
It was so helpful. And literally and it's funny because before I finished the book, when I got to Adam's chapter, I was like, oh, we're gonna have to talk about Adam because he's really embodying this spirit, right? Talk about Adam from your perspective and how you crafted him as a character.
I was always very curious about this thing, this construct we call race, and the ways in which America defines it. One of the shocking things to me was realizing that the way we define race here in America is not universal. So in America, we have this thing called the one-drop rule, where if you have one drop of African blood, you are black. Other parts of the world are like, what? No. In South Africa, you would be colored.
Right.
You would be neither black nor white. In Haiti, you would be white because you need more to be black.
Right.
In places like Brazil and the Dominican Republic, they have many different names.
Yep.
So I was very interested in going back to a past time to discuss this is how race is constructed. And this is what happens when these two races meet in one body. This person lives in this liminal space where they get some privileges as a result of their phenotype, but they are reminded in other ways you are still not at the top of the hierarchy. Right. I mean, it was just fun to to sort of think about that in the character of Adam, and also pose the question, what is the responsibility of the person in that position? If we're going to think about things like justice.
Oh, wow.
So that was sort of my way of trying to explore those questions and those ideas.
Yeah, I love that. I had never heard of, or I never thought rather, about the question of responsibility of those people. I actually, when I read Adam's story, my initial thought was more about the pain that I imagine Adam experienced, given his unique positionality, as they would say.
And the ways he had to come into the world.
Yeah.
The pain that created him, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. And it was to your, it's funny because my memory of Adam's story was that it was wholly unfulfilling on both sides, right? He was a loner,
Yes.
in the way that you described yourself to be a little bit earlier. Found sort of community in a variety of ways and found closeness in a variety of ways with different kinds of people. But it seemed like there was always sort of a governor on his level of closeness, right? It was
Right.
never reaching sort of full gusto with either of the parties that he would dip in and out of.
That's correct.
And that's the sort of, that's what I left feeling.
That's the conundrum of the ways in which we construct race in this country and in the world,
Yeah.
where your belonging is shifty and not something that is solid ground.
Yeah.
And it's a shame.
Yeah. It's funny, you use the word belonging, and it's an interesting question because outside of a racial context, inclusive of that, but beyond that, I guess is what I was trying to say, we think a lot about belonging, of course, here at Vassar. Of course, we are a liberal arts college that cares a lot about people feeling welcomed and included and like they belong here. And I think the world, frankly, is in a, we don't say it this way, but I think the world is in a massive project of belonging, right? People in their own ways aspire to feel like they belong to something.
Yes.
Right? And that drives lots of great things, but it also drives lots of really detrimental things as well, too. And I think this point you just made is quite instructive because the truth is, I think we have fashioned a world in which belonging almost never, there's not really a satisfactory place in which to stand, right?
Because it hinges on things that don't matter.
Correct. Yeah. They don't hinge on humanity
Right.
oftentimes.
Right.
Right. Which is a very difficult way to live.
It's extremely difficult.
Speaking of belonging, related to the book, but separate from the book, as the book was being written, because it took quite some time, which I think great things take time. So that was not a dig at all. You were curating and running sort of a digital community called Son of Baldwin.
Yes.
And I imagine one of the goals of Son of Baldwin was to create a space where people did feel like they belonged across all kinds of dimensions and domains.
Yes.
Right? Can you reflect on the experience of running that community? You mentioned some of what you learned a moment ago in terms of a global perspective of Blackness, but just reflect on that community and what were some of the high points of running that community or curating that community, if you will?
Son of Baldwin was a very interesting project for me because that's exactly what I was trying to do is bridge across identity boundaries a community of people who shared a common goal, which is that of basic human respect. And the high point was the fact that I got to speak on a regular basis with people across the African diaspora about their experiences as queer or trans or non-binary or intersex in ways that sort of expanded my thinking about those things because, you know, I was born in the Western world, and we tend to think that our way of thinking is the only way of thinking, that it's the right way of thinking, not understanding that it's just a way of thinking and that there are other ways of interpreting nature and the world and oneself. And I was exposed to that, and that's what sort of inspired me to do the African chapters in the Prophets, was that I was encountering from Nigerians and South Africans this wholly, totally different understanding of gender, gender identity. In some native Nigerian languages, they don't even use male, female pronouns. Like that's unusual for them. And those sorts of things just fascinated me. Like, really? So how do you address someone? We address them as by their name or by their personhood. And that, for an American, is just mind-blowing. So those were the moments that I found most fulfilling. Being able to reach across distance to speak to people who I might have normally not had the opportunity to.
That's amazing. I did not run Son of Baldwin by any means, but I had I've had several experiences that I think are analogous to the ones you've described in terms of learning or expanding your perspective on Blackness, queerness, personhood generally.
Yes.
Through that, before I worked at Vassar, I worked in global health, and I was working on a project in Ethiopia, and I traveled there several times, and actually it was my first trip to the continent in general was to go to Ethiopia, and for a variety of reasons that was a super cool experience for me. It was never colonized. I mean, there's all these things that made it feel very special, but that was my first sort of entry point onto the continent. But I never forget, I landed in Addis at the airport and got in a cab to go wherever I had to go. This is my first day, like the first few moments in Ethiopia and Africa, whatever. And I was looking out the window because I'm just taking in all these different sites, all these different things that are just new to me. This must have been, actually it was exactly 10 years ago. And I saw these two guys on the street, and they were walking on the street holding hands. And I didn't know what to do. Because the subtext obviously is, in a sort of current political way of describing it, Ethiopia is not a particularly queer friendly place, right? There's no sort of protections, if you will, for queer relationships. So of course there's all these things going through my mind, like, what in the world is going on here? Like, I can't quite make sense of this. And I had, of course, Ethiopian colleagues who worked on the ground, so, and they were local, so I would ask them, I could trust them, I asked them questions like, I saw this and I just couldn't make sense of it. Can you explain to me? And, of course, the simple answer was that in our culture, in their culture, men and women everyone show platonic affection by holding hands in that way, right? And you can imagine how disorienting it was for a Black American to see other Black people in Africa showing affection in ways that, at least based on how Africa is fashioned in our mind, would ring to me as confusing at best.
At best.
Right?
Right. No, right.
And so ever since then, I've just been so, it stuck with me, obviously. And it's been something that I think has been a very interesting story about, again, not just Blackness, not just queerness, those things too, but just personhood and being in community and being one with each other in a way that seems pure and authentic and not tainted with all the things that come with the world.
Could you imagine the ruckus and the violence that would be incited from two men holding hands here in America platonically?
Correct.
It's unimaginable here.
Yeah.
And what does that say
about the state of our state of our spirit is what came to me.
Right.
Yeah, it was super, super interesting. So let's talk about a different aspect of the book. You mentioned it. You gave it a great sort of treatment earlier in your summary about the cast of characters that rounded the book. Of course, we're focusing on the story between Isaiah and Samuel, but there are many people who add to that story, comment on that story, and exist in and around that story, right? Who make up the book in many ways, right? And there's a whole list. I mean, there's a whole list of people. How did you decide who to add to the story of Isaiah and Samuel?
Going back to the beginning, the prophets was originally going to be told from one point of view.
Okay.
The character that eventually became Isaiah was going to be speaking to a sociologist, historian who was recording his story, and he was going to relay the events of his life as an older gentleman. but I quickly realized the limitations of that structure, that Isaiah could not know all of the goings on of the plantation or all of how he was being viewed. And I knew that the story needed to witness the love between these two characters. So they had to be the central force, even when other people were taking over the narrative. And so that's how that developed, and how we chose which voices to keep or add or
Right.
take away
Right.
was through the editorial process. My editor, Sally Kim, who was at Putnam, who is now the president and publisher of Little Brown, she worked very closely with me to say, why does this character belong here? She didn't say take them out. She just said, I need you to show me in the literary sense why this character belongs here. And if I couldn't figure out a way, that character had to go. And so there are several characters.
Let's
in the
talk
book
about
who are not there
Let's
anymore.
talk about who got erased.
I can't
Like
remember
the
all the
Maccabees.
names, but there were quite a number of characters, maybe 4 or 5, who are no longer in the book. There was one character named Ash,
Okay.
who is no longer there.
Who were they?
They were.
Is this painful to do? I'm so sorry.
No, it's not
Okay.
painful. He was a character who was willing to be Ruth's buck, for lack of a better term, and paid the price for that. We thought that having him in the book sort of detracted from what eventually transpired between Samuel and Isaiah when they were punished.
Right.
It was overkill. It was too much. And so he was an example of a character we took out of the book. She also asked, she wanted to know from me why Sarah belonged in the book. So Sarah's chapter I had to completely rewrite in order to, and then give back to her and say, do you understand now? And then she was like, now I understand.
Why is Sarah's chapter named Oh Sarah and not just Sarah?
Because she's a character where she remembers the old world.
Yeah, right.
And it is sort of like a way for the reader to be clued into this idea that while it is her that is speaking, she's speaking for many. And the many might be the 7 who are also interweaving throughout the book. So O Sarah is kind of like a call to something older than what she is, an older understanding.
Understood. Thank you for that. Back to the erasure of people from the book. That's obviously part of the process. Things have to be edited, refined, all those kinds of things, right? But given our earlier conversation, this is a personal project for you. Your life does map onto this in a variety of ways,
Yes.
right? And so talk about what it feels like to have to erase things when the project is so personal and the people that you're erasing exist in your mind, in your life, in your memory, and you think are due the space in the book.
You know what? It actually feels great because even though the project is deeply personal, I'm committed to serving the art. That, in the end, is what I want. And so it might be a little pinch or a little twinge to take out something that I thought that was a remarkable line. And my editors thought, it is a remarkable line, but it doesn't belong. You know, I sit with that and I ultimately understand it. So it wasn't one of those things where like, oh no, I'm fighting for this and you can't take this out. It never got to that point with Sally and I. It was always a deep understanding of we are both trying to serve this work as best as we possibly can. Mm-hmm. And these are the ways in which we do it. And the other part is those chapters are still in my house.
You have them.
I have them. They're for
not
me.
gone,
They're
right.
not gone.
Exactly.
They're just not publicly available.
And there's a
Maybe
role-
one day they
and
might
there's
be.
But there's a role for them to not be either.
Right.
They could just be for you or whoever you decide needs them on an individual basis.
Exactly right.
I love that. About the cast of characters, I'm going to go on a limb for a moment. Or really what I'm saying is, at the risk of sounding like in a Trumpian sort of, there's good people on both sides from a Charlottesville sort of perspective,
Okay.
right? At the risk of sounding like that, which I don't think that's not the spirit I have, but I will say that one of the things that struck me the most, and I'm still sitting with it, I haven't figured it out if there is a figuring out to be had, was as I read the chapters of the whole cast of characters, right? Maybe it's the cancer in me, I don't know. But I felt the topic sentence is, I think you did a great job of humanizing every person on the plantation.
Thank you.
Right? In ways that I think are unpopular, right? That's what I'm saying. Like,
Yes.
at the risk of sounding like there's good people on all sides,
Right,
right?
right.
You've humanized people in ways that I think is needed and beautiful, but it is not popular. People don't want to sound or be perceived as a slavery apologist or
Right.
a rapist apologist or
Right.
all these things,
Right.
right? That said, right, everyone in the novel has a story, right? There's a Hebrew saying that translates to, "In every person is the universe." And I couldn't help but think about that as I read the book, because everyone did have dynamic stories and tensions and pressures and loving feelings, all that in their stories, right? How is it for you to write these characters, some of whom, again, were slaveholders, they were rapists, all these things, but write them in a way that left room for someone like me to feel empathy and to humanize them?
It was difficult. I, like every other American, was indoctrinated into the binaries: good, bad, black, white, up, down, left, right.
These contrasts.
Right. And I wanted to break out of that, because one of the hardest things to confront is that serial killer might have been horribly abused as a child. And that might have maybe not caused him to become a serial killer, but added to that path. Not to say that that excuses that behavior.
Certainly.
But it humanizes, it makes it more difficult for me now to say, punish him.
Yeah, you can't. There's
and
a
not
summary
feel
judgment.
bad.
Yes.
Because I think if we're going to say punish him, we should feel bad. We should feel bad. Even if we decide electric chair. I don't ever want to be the person that could walk away from watching someone being electrified in a chair and think, good. I want to feel horrible that that's the best that we can do for humanity. I want to feel horrible about that. So when I was writing Paul's chapter in particular, which is the longest chapter in the book, and it was so long because it took me a long time to try to understand how someone can become that.
Yeah. Paul, for those listening, who don't know, is the owner and slave holder of the plantation.
Yes, the ultimate villain of the book.
We're gonna come back to that.
He's the ultimate
Let's
villain,
come
because
back
I know
to
a lot
that.
of people say Amos, but I have to correct that.
Okay,
it's
we'll
it's
fight
Paul.
about it in a second.
Okay. I had to ask myself, what could make someone look at another person and see property? What could make a person think that the end and all of life is accumulation, taking, resources? And what the answer that I discovered was, you were taught that from an early age. That was given to you in the place of love, and so you think that is what love is. To be greedy, to have insatiable desires. And that was where the seed was. And I was like, okay, I unlocked it for him. So now I can get into all the horrible things he's done.
Yeah.
But we do see, I could still see the wounded child.
It's funny. I don't disagree with you. I'm adding a different, adding a different perspective to how you characterize Paul.
Okay.
How I read it was that was not quite greed. That is obviously what it is in the real sense of the word, but I read it more as like protection. Protection of his father's legacy.
Oh, okay.
Protection of
Okay.
his family's well-being.
Okay.
Right. Pride and real, like, authentic, not arrogant pride, but real commitment to what he understood to be the beautiful vision for life that his father set him up for, right?
Mhm.
And actually also, and what
Which
resonated
is
with
love.
me,
Yes.
right,
Yes.
was him feeling like my father did so much, sacrificed so much with very little for me to be able to have what I have, that I can't go back. I can't regress on the success that he has prepared me for. And in many ways, again, this is the humanizing part for me, was like, I resonate with that, right? I have parents who are from the Deep South, right? Who grew up very differently than I did, who had far less resources. And I understand the desire to do things and live in a way that shows continued growth, by which to say is appreciation for what they've done for you.
Yes.
Right. So that's actually how I read, which is why it's funny for you to say that he's the key villain. I get why you would say that, but I was like, I actually had a lot of empathy in relationship to Paul, which I know is a crazy thing to say, but I really did.
Have mercy.
I'm going to edit this part out. Sorry, there's no censorship. I won't edit it out. No.
I love it. I love it.
Yeah.
So you wanted to argue with me about Amos and Paul?
Well, no, no, we don't have to argue about it. It's just, I actually, in the same way, I can empathize with Amos as well, obviously, too, right? I mean, I think he wanted a love and a relationship. For those who are not listening, Amos is he's an enslaved person, but for whom Paul had a little bit of favor. And the verb I was going to use is gifted him with the ability to learn how to read, and then empowered him to be able to preach his religion to the other enslaved people on the plantation. That obviously had a very sordid ending. Yeah, like, of course, I rolled my eyes every time Amos spoke and every time there was Amos interaction. Like, oh, this one, like so predictable, so predictable. But what I will say, not in the spirit of fighting about who was worse, but in the spirit of the humanization, what I did appreciate, which I think is not often the story that people tell about people like Amos, is that they too are protecting something for themselves, right? Or trying to carve out something for themselves that they can hold as constant and steady and can be a reliable source of joy for them.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So I can appreciate that in the same way that's what Isaiah and Samuel were doing too. Amos was doing it in his own way.
Right.
So I can appreciate that. And it was helpful to hear that added to his story. I was just irritated with him. That's the truth. I'm gonna be honest with you. I just, he just worked my nerves, and I just couldn't stand it. I just couldn't stand it.
He was one of the most interesting characters to work on in the book. It was. I don't hate him. I don't hate any of the characters in my book. They tell you, you as a writer, you should not love or hate your characters.
Wow.
But you should respect them.
Okay.
And so that's how I feel about them. Although I'm human, so I have my favorites. But the reason why I say Paul is the ultimate villain of the book is because Amos would not have to have done what he is doing unless Paul didn't set the foundation for that. So
yeah, but it's funny
he's
though.
The puppet master.
It is true. But Paul, again, my reading of it was that Paul had a much more. Well, actually, what I'm about to say is contradictory. But I think he had a much more humane reaction to what Amos brought to him than folks would have assumed, right? I think Paul's ultimate decision, which couldn't come to bear, to sell them as opposed to he ended up killing somebody, but that wasn't his intention originally, right? Here I go being a Paul apologist again. But his decision to sell them, I do think it was born out of sort of a non-human perspective. I think he thought they were more
valuable.
they were more like commodities, which could be sold, if you will. So it was sort of a dehumanizing aspect to it, but it would have allowed them to live, right? And it would have allowed them to still have their own soul and their own ability to experience the world, right? In a way that wouldn't have existed had they just been killed, right?
Right.
And so those little tinges, I was like, oh, I kind of not that I love Paul, but I saw potential in Paul. And I actually could imagine a world in which if everyone lived, right, I could imagine his son Timothy changing his father, over time. Maybe it was a projected desire. Maybe it was something that I thought would be a really beautiful way for the story to keep going. But I saw an opening in Paul and saw sort of humanity in him that would have allowed his son to be a positive change agent in his life.
How I interpret it is,
well, you wrote it, so
this part, or this question in particular, is in conversation with Beloved. Is it really worse to die,
right, than to live in this?
Right. And from my perspective, being enslaved in the ways in which our ancestors were enslaved in this country, I'm glad some of them survived. But I don't think I have the privilege to think that death would be worse.
No, fully understood. I think what I was motivated by, you're right, full stop. And I think what I was motivated by was to see, I sound so crazy, to see what was able to be born in spite of, right?
Yes.
Made me feel like, oh my goodness, like there in this story, in this narrative on this plantation, and I'm sure many others in real life, there is such an ability to fight through the molasses and to fight through the vitriol and still create in ways that made people feel like joy and love and speak to their ancestors and see things that weren't there and all those things that I was like, I had to imagine no one would want to live in that, but if you were able to live in that and still feel these kinds of nuanced, deep emotions, feeling, and experiences, I'm like, gosh.
Look at African American history and what we've been able to accomplish under the most dire of circumstances. It's extraordinary.
Right. Absolutely. Full stop.
My goodness.
It was incredible. The other person who, one thing about Paul. One thing about Paul.
Okay.
No, listen.
Okay.
The other moment when I felt a real, not quite resonance, but an appreciation.
I know what you're going to say. Go ahead.
You actually think what I'm going to say? You know what I'm going to say? Do you think so? I wish you could write it down so I could actually see, but I'll just trust you.
Okay.
Was when he was at that bar. Is that what you thought I was going to say?
Keep going.
And when he got played and got robbed and all that kind of stuff, but left that happy and left that, not happy, but left that feeling like, oh my goodness.
That's not what I thought you were going to say.
I know. So I'll finish, but I want to hear what you thought I was going to say. But when Paul had this horrific experience that in some ways was dehumanizing to him, given that he otherwise in the story had this trump card, he was the apex predator kind of role, yes. Right? For him to then have let his wall down, right? And allow himself to be vulnerable, to be taken advantage of in certain ways that otherwise he would have been the arbiter of, right? But then to actually be like giddy and like not particularly upset and feel like, oh, this is what it's like to be sort of like a regular person freed of the expectation I put myself of my father in this situation.
You read this book.
Right? I was like, that is a very understandable situation, right? For him to be like, even at what people might think is my lowest, I'm actually feeling very good about it. And I'm feeling not vengeful or vindictive or desirous of any sort of hate. I actually feel quite good about this.
The burdens of patriarchy are lifted.
Right. That's exactly what it was. It was I was obsessed with that moment. I really was. Wow. I really loved it. What did you think I was going to say about Paul?
The moment right after that when he confronts Adam.
Yes.
And he has that moment of vulnerability.
Yes.
That's what I thought you were going to say.
Well, yes, I didn't finish, the whole moment was for me super, super special. And then to hear, I think it was in a subsequent chapter, I don't remember the order. The subsequent chapter, I think, when Adam was telling his perspective of that moment, of course, not having known what happened in the alley behind, right? Not knowing that he was coming from this otherwise very vulnerable situation and coming sort of like crawling back to the car, so to speak, right? It was so interesting that Adam didn't quite have access to the real feeling that his father had.
Right.
You know, he didn't know what his dad was experiencing in that moment, which again I think the orientation of the book, such that not everyone is always aware, you said earlier, of other people's perspective, their feelings, the facts that inform their life, I think is a fact of our lives, right?
Right.
And I think it's a humbling thing to recognize that you don't know, as much as you might try, what is the real or perceived things influencing how people engage with you, right?
That's right.
And particularly on a college campus in this moment, right? I think it's a very worthwhile lesson to engage
Everybody has a story.
all the time. So let's talk about what didn't make it in the book, but that could be the nugget of another project. I imagine this was a very exhaustive project for you, right?
Yes, I did. I had to do a lot of research.
Right.
Particularly on the before time Africa aspects of it, which for me were the most fulfilling. And I would love to do like a prequel or something of some sort about King Akusa. She's one of my favorite characters in the book, and I didn't get to explore her the way that I wanted to. Two characters threatened to actually take over the book, Maggie
Okay.
and King Akusa. And so I had to work with my editor to make sure we pulled it back some.
Oh, wow.
So that Samuel and Isaiah remained the focus. But I found myself like delving into their lives and their beings and wanting to know more and more and more and more. So possibly, although I don't know if I ever want to go back to that far in the past.
Okay. Why?
It's very hard on the body. When I was writing certain scenes in the Prophets, particularly the violence, I could feel a burning sensation on the skin. And what kept me going was they lived it. The least you could do is witness it. But I could feel it. And I did not, it was very uncomfortable. I did not like that feeling. If I did go back, it would be to pre-colonial Africa and King Akusa. It would never. I will never write another book about the antebellum period, though. Never again.
Well, I'm happy you brought that up. So we're going to talk about a couple of things you just said.
Okay.
Okay, perfect. So I've heard you say before that one of the worries you had about the book was that because people, whoever they might be, see the antebellum South in the slavery that's a part of that in a very sacrosanct way, and so disrupting the narrative that people had come to accept about that by giving voice to the queer love story that took part in this account of the antebellum South, you were nervous it made people sort of frustrated, right?
Right.
And I understand that. And it makes a lot of sense intellectually. The question I had, which I'm sure you grapple with too, was sort of like, but are we going to act like the antebellum South was some otherwise purist, beautiful thing? Like, there's all these other things happening in the antebellum South, right, that we would agree were horrific and inhumane and dehumanizing, all these things. And so I was like, are we really concerned that people will think that this addition to the story is going to make it any less, disruptive or dirty than it was in real life?
You know what I hear from Black readers is that they feel like the slave story is a stereotype, a negative stereotype. Why do we have to keep talking about slavery? It's sort of like they think that slavery is the Black person's sin, but it's not. I'm not ashamed of my ancestors, what they survived. Just personally for me, I don't think I could tell another story in that time period, but I am open to anybody else any other Black person telling that story, because I feel like there were 6 million enslaved people possibly, then there's 6 million stories to tell.
Yeah.
And so I will always be an advocate of that time period being excavated, whether nonfiction or fiction or poetry, however it comes. And also be very careful so as not to stereotype that, give it the space and the nuance and the dimension that it deserves, so that these characters are not flat, and that time period isn't just like, this binary good evil thing, that it is represented as the complicated and complex thing that it is.
Yeah.
But I don't mind those stories being told, and I think they should be told.
Yeah.
That's part of the problem is in this country, is that we don't know our history.
Right. Absolutely. I have a couple more things before we go into our student hot seat questions. The first is, and maybe we should have asked it from the beginning, but it came to me to ask you just moments ago, who, and I don't mean this in a consumption-based way. You'll know what I mean in a second.
Okay.
Who do you hope reads The Prophet?
That young black queer boy who thinks he's by himself, and that he believes all the things that the religious people in his life had told him about the damnation of his body and spirit. The young black queer boy who feels unloved and unlovable. That's who I wrote that book for, because I was literally talking to young Bobby when I was writing it, and realized that young Bobby there's a lot of young Bobbies. So I'm hoping that that young man gets to see and read this and understand that he has a lineage and a history, and that there is nothing wrong with him.
Beautiful. I have some, before my student questions, I have some random things that I want to make sure that it's titled Funny Stories on here.
Okay.
So one was the hospitable demons, or being hospitable to demons. We talked about that already. Yes. The second thing that I laughed out loud about, I was like, my mom is going to hate this, was when you described it in a very real way, but it was funny out of context. You described sort of the food that the enslaved people were eating at some point in time, and you described pig parts that were seasoned well enough to hide the acrid taste, and I screamed out loud because I can't stand chitlins.
The smell. And my mother loved them. She loved chitlins.
I can't. And my mother, my family's from Mississippi. So again, reading the book was resonant in
your
lots of
family's
different
from
ways.
Mississippi.
Yeah.
Bless them.
I'm a Florida boy, but my family's from Mississippi.
Okay.
And so many parts of this were very resonant to me, particularly that part, because still at Thanksgiving, I'm like, oh my gosh, can we please? But I gotta let you have your memory,
right?
So you can continue having. And the other thing, and I'm not gonna complete my thought, but you might know what I mean. The other funny scene, or the scene that was very, it brought back memories or lots of associations, I should say, was the hair braiding scene.
And Pooh was doing her little walk. Okay.
She was upset and the whole thing, but it reminds me of someone who shall not be named who had a song about this, and I kept singing the song in my head as I read the scene.
Solange?
No,
I thought you were alluding to "Don't Touch My Hair" by Solange.
Not that song.
Okay,
a song from someone from Chicago.
Does the person's name start with an R?
Yeah. That song.
Okay.
That's the one that came to mind originally.
Okay.
And I was like, oh, I gotta get this. I gotta rid this from my memory. The other funny thing before I go into these questions was I had to laugh out loud myself too, because many of the chapters, of course, in the spirit of this turning upside down, this Judeo-Christian interpretation of life that would have Isaiah and Samuel not find place for themselves in the world. The chapters are named, many of them, after books of the Bible. And it reminded me of my Sunday school days, because I went to Sunday school, and one of our homework assignments was to memorize all the books of the Bible. And I was practicing when I read the book. I'm like, do I actually remember all of them?
Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, Joshua, Judges, Ruth, 1 Samuel, 2 Samuel.
Oh, I
1
say it
Kings,
differently.
2 Kings.
I have to say it 1st and 2nd Samuel. I can't say it separately. But yes, yes.
We had to do that too.
So
I don't remember them all though.
I don't remember any New Testament books, only Old Testament. But the funny thing was, because in my Sunday school class, me and my homegirl were the two that could do it successfully, we won a prize.
Oh.
And our prize was a signed Magic Johnson basketball, which I still have in the house today.
Oh, wow.
And that is because of my Bible book memorization. And so when I read your book, I was like, okay, like I still got it. Like I deserve my basketball. Like it's still something I can make claim to, but it was super cool. I
Wow.
loved that. And I did notice there was very few if no New Testament books as titles of the chapters.
There was originally.
Okay.
Covenant, the New Covenant was originally titled Revelation.
Okay. I was so curious because there was very few New Testament allusions at all.
Right.
But there was Judas, Amos, but not much more than that. Thank you. This is wonderful. Let me ask these questions before we get off the line.
Thank you so much.
So our first question is, I have to edit it because we sort of already talked about that. Let me do the last one first.
Okay.
Which character was hardest to profile?
Paul. Because it took a really long time to determine how to get into the head of somebody that can dehumanize another person by matter of course.
Yeah. Thank you for that. What was the most unexpected reaction from people in your family or close to you about the book?
My mother loved it. And my mother was a person who always downplayed her own intellect because she didn't have a formal education. I mean, she went to high school and such, got her high school diploma, but she felt like she was not intelligent. My mother was able to understand parts of the book that other people couldn't grasp. And that was very surprising to me because she never really presented herself to me in that kind of way because she didn't think she was that kind of person, but low-key she was. And that was very surprising and very fulfilling.
I love that. I love that. And the last question is, as a writer and as an author, do you have any third rails? Are there stories you won't tell?
That is a good question. If I find that I can't tell a story in a way that isn't going to add something novel or that I can't tell it in a way that's three-dimensional, I won't tell it. But I don't think anything is off limits, but I would probably not want to write about things like incest or, I could not write a novel like Push by Sapphire, even though I realized how needed that testimony was, and I read it, and it was beautifully told and sensitively told story, although, interpretations have done something else with it, but I think the book itself has merit. I don't think I could ever write a story like that, only because it might bring up some uncomfortable things for myself. It might trigger me in certain ways, and also I don't know if I could tolerate the gazes that might be on that work.
Yeah, understood. Thank you. Thank you for what you do. Thank you for being here. Thank you for telling stories in the way that only you can. And thank you for being a person on this earth. I think the more that we have people like you on this earth that see the humanity in others and in themselves and let that influence how they engage with others, I think it can be a much better place to live.
Thank you so much for saying that. That was a blessing, and I appreciate that so much. And thank you so much for your hospitality.
I try. I was raised right by Valina and Jean. And thank you all for joining us for another episode at Conversation at the Salt Lines. Talk to you soon.